The White Sox are rolling, and I got three things that impressed me about last night's victory to discuss and a compromise of who the team should keep to stay fun bad on today's episode of Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan, a contributor for SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the Fansided Network, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And additionally, follow or subscribe to the show on your preferred podcast platform. So I want to kick off today's show with three things I found impressive about last night's 8-3 drubbing of the Tampa Bay Rays. Then let's shift into a compromise of how the team can still be in asset acclimation mode, but also stay fun bad this year for our personal enjoyment. And finally, I got some mailbag questions I want to tackle. So three things I loved about last night's victory were as follows. Number one, I loved how Will Venable managed last night's game. Number two, Chase Meidroth and Miguel Vargas are doing everything possible from not turning back into pumpkins. I give them a lot of credit for that. And number three, Brooks Baldwin's 3-run home run got me thinking, at what point do you and I need to stop being actually so cynical or even sarcastic when it comes to this franchise? And I'm going to go in reverse order here. And shout out to my guy, Beefloaf from the 108.com for being the inspiration on this Baldwin thought, because he tweeted this out right after Brooks Baldwin smashed the first pitch he saw and crushed that 3-run shot. This is the tweet I have up for those watching on YouTube at Mr. Delicious13. I do like that Brooks Baldwin has smoked his two most impressive Major League home runs in minor league ballparks, and then he's got the laughing, crying emoji. And while it is true, Brooks Baldwin rakes in minor league stadiums. And I even replied to Beef that probably Baldwin would be a Hall of Famer if all he had to do was play in minor league, configured stadiums. But then I thought to myself, man, have us Sox fans have become so disillusioned that we just can't blindly follow this team right now? That we can't just finally be like, you know what? Let's just enjoy that. Because he literally saw a four-seam fastball, belt high, jumped on it, and absolutely crushed it. Sox up 3-0. Most fan bases are going to be like, hey, yeah, that's awesome. And this is also not meant to be a slam, because we should have some fun. There's nothing wrong with having fun. It's just, it always seems like we're just being more and more cynical every day. And I'm not slamming Beefloaf either. I'm not trying to create a beef with Beefloaf. I'm actually trying to get him on the show at some point. But, for example, you got the Brewers fan base completely embracing Andrew Vaughn. I mean, they're acting like he's the second coming. And even I'm warning my Milwaukee neighbors, he's going to break your heart. But they can embrace him and they can love him like this, because this franchise, the Brewers have not given him so many reasons to be so cynical. The White Sox clearly have earned the cynicism, the disillusionment, and the criticism. But it got me thinking, at one point did the majority of us have to maybe just be like, hey, let's just sit back and enjoy the ride. Let's just sit back and enjoy that the White Sox are actually playing some cleaner baseball this year, even though they did have 2 errors last night. When are we going to be able to be like, you know what, man, we're on a good stretch, without thinking, oh, the other shoe's going to drop? Obviously, it's going to be the day that Jerry Reinsdorf hands over controlling, ownership to Justin Ispia, but that's not for another 4 years at the earliest. And for those that are going to jump in the mentions that say, well, Jerry's got to go. The only crime Jerry is committing right now is not authorizing enough money to be spent in free agency. But then again, things have gotten so bad, so rotten, that this is probably not the time to spend. This was the time to actually modernize the front office, modernize player development and scouting, get like TrackMan devices and actually draft well. And by all appearances, that's being done. And don't get me wrong, I would love to see the White Sox actually spend money and write checks to become competitive again. But it's not going to happen. The only way they're going to get competitive again is through draft and development, which, hey, we got burned so badly by last decade's rebuild that cynicism and sarcasm should not go away until you and I actually see this current rebuild not only win a division or make a wild card, get a wild card spot, but win a playoff series. mean, we were burned. So there's nothing wrong with guarding your heart and having some fun and having some jokes at the expense of the franchise, because the franchise has given you every reason for them to be the butt of jokes. But I also do suggest that, hey, there's nothing wrong with enjoying the ride, but my suggestion is when the White Sox have a lead, that's usually when I go full passionate meatball. That's when I am like, all right, here we're going to go, and I'm going to ride the roller coaster. I'm going to still see that there's probably dark clouds with that bullpen potentially blowing a lead, but you know what? I'm going to believe. And usually when they're behind, I'm like, yep, that's about right. That seems like the natural order. Now, in terms of Vargas and Meidroth, their slumps before the All-Star break were so bad that maybe you thought they were going to turn out to be failed hype. I mean, it was looking that way. I mean, the swing adjustment that Miguel Vargas made that got to the point where even the New York Mets were like, we're not pitching to this guy. Looked like it was just a flash in the pan. I mean, that's how bad he was slumping. Chase Meidroth looked like maybe he needs to go back to Charlotte. And while I still think both are going to be raised floor players on the next good team, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, the Sox need better F4 players in supporting roles, because usually if you have your 1.52 F4 players as your supporting players, usually means you're going to have a better team if you have more of them, obviously. But they are raging against turning into proverbial pumpkins, and I appreciate that effort. I appreciate that they are doing everything they can to be like, you know what? Chase Meidroth's like, I'm not going to be Derek or Dark Burton or Barton, whatever Bez from On Tap Sportsnet compares him on Twitter. And Vargas, yes, he's still going to give his haters. And remember, I was an original hater. I've come around. I really appreciate the effort. But they're still going to point out, his average is bad, but not realizing the context. But I appreciate that they're like, you know what? I'm not going gently into that good night. I mean, Vargas hit another home run last night, his second straight game. He also collected 2 walks, and then the OPS is now back over that decent 700 mark. He's actually 5 for 16 over his past 7 days with 3 doubles, 2 home runs, and 7 runs scored. He has a 1.325 OPS during that stretch. So maybe he's actually learned that, you know what, I need to lay off pitches down and away, because I think that's what he was starting to struggle with, that he wasn't getting any pitches whatsoever. And if you look at his swing, he still has this natural inclination to swing at anything that goes away. It seems natural to him. So that's just something that maybe he still needs to work at. But if he keeps laid off pitches and just says, hey, they're not going to give me anything to hit, I'll take my walks. And when I do get something to hit, I'm going to punish it. We're in good spots here, guys. And then Meidroth is back to hitting over 250 with a 4 for 5 day. He nearly missed hitting a home run in his first at bat. He is 7 for 20 over his past 7 days with 4 doubles and a 900 OPS. And I think those two, we just need to ride the roller coaster with them too, because raised floor players will have slumps where it looks like, oh boy, these guys are bad. But then they can go on a run and be like, yeah, we got to remember that these are probably solid professional baseball players. They're going to have highs and lows. And then Will Venable, loved what he did in managing the game. Sox jump out to the 6-0 lead after the third, and he wasn't going to let the Tampa Bay Rays off the mat. He was not going to let this team let the Rays back in the game. I mean, the moment Tampa started to threaten to get back into this game, he started managing it like it was Game 7 of the World Series. I mean, it was Johnny Allstaff. And, okay, in July, might be a bit of overreaction, but hey, I like the message that it sends. It's like, we got these guys down. Let's keep them down. He saw Sean Burke struggling with his command. He had 4 walks and a high pitch count by the 4th. And he wasn't about to let Burke try to eat up the 5th. Walk the first batter, boom, out. And then he managed the bullpen to keep the Rays from ever getting back into the game. So I like that Venable saw that despite being up, he had to keep the Rays down on the mat and manage the game to do what he could do to keep them knocked out. Well, the Sox have won 4 in a row, but the timing has never been the White Sox strong suit, as the team likely gets broken up with the trade deadline looming. But I do want to propose a compromise that could allow the White Sox to keep some veterans to allow the team to stay fun bad, and let's discuss that after the break on Locked On White Sox. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You already are following the action. Why not make it a little bit more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. FanDuel's traditional money line spreads and over-unders. They're fun to play, but I always maintain if you want to win big or at least double or even triple your money, then go with FanDuel's parlays, props, and futures. You can bet on things like the game going into the extra innings, and that's usually at a plus number. Like last night, it was at plus 860. So think of that. You can bet, $10 on that and basically win potentially 8 times your money if the game goes in extra innings. You can bet on things like the White Sox being ahead after the first inning. That could actually, last night it was at plus 410. So you think about this. You can actually, if these things hit, you can make a lot of cash there. So if you're new to FanDuel, go bet just $5 and you're going to get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. What you got to do is you got to open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch a show on YouTube, Locked On White Sox is available on all major podcast platforms. So make sure to follow or subscribe on places such as Apple or Spotify. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me. All right, so I know I've gone back and forth on what the White Sox should do at the trade deadline. This is, again, where you get the passionate meatball fandom. On one end, you want to be like, man, this is fun actually watching the White Sox win some games. It's been so long since they've had a winning streak. You almost forgot what it feels like, and you're like, I just never want this to end. I mean, Dan Plesac is willing to wear the same white polo shirt and not wash it during the television broadcast because he thinks, hey, the White Sox are going good because of his white polo t-shirt, which may have magical powers. And I talked about it on yesterday's episode. But on the same end, they got to be in asset acclimation mode. And I do want to discuss ESPN's trying to make it seem like it's going to be a huge, tall order to trade Luis Robert Jr. in just a second. But, it's just, I want to go over maybe that there's a way that we could have a compromise. Because the other reason why I go back and forth is the White Sox don't have a ton of valuable trade assets this year. We just got to look at that and see it for what it is. I mean, Adrian Hauser is no Garrett Crochet. And I'm not sure Aaron Savali and Dan Altavilla have the same pedigree as Lance Allen and Joe Kelly to net like a Jordan Leisure back in a deal. Especially since Savali was just traded for a failed player in Andrew Vaughn. Most of the guys the White Sox do have to trade actually might have a little bit more value in helping the young emerging core intangibly. Savali, he can eat innings. That's going to help a young starting rotation who are already nearing their career innings limits. I mean, you already got Shane Smith on the 15-day IL with a sprained ankle. Wink, wink, nod, nod. I mean, maybe he did while running, but it's just like, guy's tiring out. Didn't look that good in the All-Star game. Suddenly he's got a sprained ankle from running. But anyway, you could use somebody to finish out the season, to at least help preserve a lot of these young arms. And Davis Martin is coming off the 15-day IL, but he's going to be logging probably another career innings. Jonathan Cannon, I think he only threw, 119 innings last year? Sean Burke, this will be his first full year. Mike Tauchman's a great leader and a professional hitter. Michael A. Taylor can still play great late inning defense. In the outfield, Austin Slater can help a team win when facing left-handed pitching. Even Josh Rojas can be a late inning defensive replacement to help secure some more wins. Because remember, the White Sox have been in more games this year. So when you got guys that can actually, field the ball and not boot it around late in the game and be in the right spots and potentially catch a ball, it can help a lot of these young players get some more confidence and learn how to do this thing called win. But again, the White Sox are still at this point in the rebuild where they should be in asset acclimation mode. Because none of these guys on their own are going to fetch that timeline accelerating prospect. And I don't even know if you're going to be able to bundle them to get a timeline accelerating prospect. So would it be better to just keep the team mostly intact and enjoy the fun bad summer? Because it could be fun bad. And as I said on past shows, I'm not fully ready to say, hey, this is a fun bad team. You can. I've got my standards, and they're getting close. And I discussed it a bit on yesterday's show. So I want to just actually go over a compromise where it comes to how the Sox should attack the trade deadline, but also maybe keep some players that, who can help this team still have a fun, bad summer. First, the process should be bundle the assets, even though I'm contradicting myself, but I do think that gives you still the best opportunity to get some high ceiling, players. Obviously, I was against it last year, but only because Eric Fetty and Michael Kopech still had club control and they still had value in things that contenders need, like starting pitching and relievers. And Fetty was probably one of the best starting pitchers available on the trade market last year based on that cheap club control. He still had another year left on his deal at $7.5 million, and he was productive. And Kopech was pitching better before the trade deadline. Remember, he had the immaculate inning. So they could have fetched something better on their own rather than Miguel Vargas and 2 scratch-off prospects, one which had a broken leg. Obviously, if Miguel Vargas keeps hitting, being at least a raised floor player, Terrell Perez potentially has a chance to join him. It still looks like a good trade, but imagine if you had gotten 2 from the Dodgers and for Kopech and say 2 from the St. Louis Cardinals or 2 from the Minnesota Twins. Maybe it's a little bit better. But this year, the White Sox actually they don't have that. I mean, honestly, the only way that Mike Tauchman should be dealt is if he's like bundled with, say, Adrian Hauser or Steven Wilson. Maybe they need to bundle all 3 of them. And the return should be get some scratch off high ceiling prospects. I'm talking about, those international free agents with high ceilings that teams will part with because, hey, they are still unknown. I get the risk is immense, but it might be worth it if a few of them turn out to be Fernando Tatis and O'Neal Cruz. Although this goes back again to the cynicism. You have to trust, first of all, the White Sox scouting department, and you have to trust the White Sox player development department to have that happen. But the White Sox farm system, I still think, needs more high ceiling potential guys. They still need an infusion of that. They got a lot of good, I think, raised floor players. But when I look at, hey, these guys have the chance to be superstars, again, Braden Montgomery, recently drafted Billy Carlson, maybe Jaden Foskey, maybe George Wolcott, and Caleb Bonemer in terms of hitting. And that's the thing, too. You got to get some bats. And this rebuild does need to produce superstars. So go get those guys instead of going safe with the raised floor players. So if bundling to get a higher seal playing can't happen, don't trade them. Take the intangible value. And then this is who needs to go, Dan Altavilla and Steven Wilson, because I still think the trade market will be kind to bullpen arms. Wilson won't be a free agent until 2028, but he is 30. And the Sox do have younger, more controllable right-handed arms in the system to make up for him. And plus, who knows when he's going to go back to being an all-pro reliever that gets DFA'd, because that did happen. And Adrian Hauser, I do think you need to capitalize on his hot streak, although thanks for being a wet blanket, ESPN's Buster Olney. As he writes, Chicago's Adrian Hauser seems likely to move as a second-tier starter who has performed well this season. The 32-year-old right-hander was released by the Rangers in May, but has been very effective since joining the White Sox rotation, giving up only 2 home runs in 57 2/3 innings and generating an ERA plus of 2.26. Here's the wet blanket part. Nobody is taking those numbers at face value, but evaluators do view him as a market option. Well, I mean, again, that's why you might have to bundle Hauser. And Luis Robert Jr., he's got to go. I mean, I get he's on a heater, and I love seeing it too. But he also had a decent stretch at the end of April, only to go into a terrible funk. Go back to some of those episodes that I had. The White Sox just cannot risk this being a strong second half and then exercising his $20 million option to trade him in the offseason. It's just too much of a risk because he could easily go back into a funk. And if he goes back into slump town, then you're paying him $2 million to go away and the asset status is gone. So I still think exercising the $20 million option, regardless of what happens to keep asset status, will not yield the return the team is hoping for. It's not 2023 anymore. And the teams have pointed that out, according to GM Chris Getz, whenever he's talked about the trade rumors. And teams are always going to find an excuse to say, well, he's too streaky or injury prone to give up good value. So I do think, though, ESPN has to make up their mind, although at least stop this narrative, like how they ignore that the 2005 World Series happened, because they make it seem like Luis Robert Jr. trading him will be impossible. Here's what Olney writes. But it seems unlikely that Luis Robert Jr., once projected as a centerpiece of this deadline, will be dealt unless a team makes a big bet on a player who has either underperformed or been hurt this year. The White Sox could continue to wait on Robert's talent to manifest and his trade value to be restored by picking up his $20 million option for next year, which is hardly out of the question for a team with little future obligation payroll. Yeah, Buster, that's your bias. It's just completely out there. Because, even Jim Bowden and USA Today's, I know he can be loud wrong a lot, but even USA Today's Bob Nightingale's reported interest is peaking. Why? Well, teams still need outfielders. And even though he is a rental, because I doubt a team is going to pick up his option, a team will be willing to rent him as long as the White Sox are willing to cover some costs, which it sounds like they will. So, otherwise, I'm fine if they keep the rest of these players, even Austin Slater, Michael A. Taylor, like I said. Well, I'm trying to make a mailbag segment a regular thing on Tuesdays. So I got 2 mailbag questions to tackle today, and I'll get to them after the break on Locked On White Sox. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you had a service emergency, like a bursted pipe. If the first phone number didn't answer, did you wait? No. Call the next one. That's why having a reliable business line is so important. That's why you need OpenPhone. OpenPhone is the #1 business phone system that helps you streamline and scale customer communication, all from an app on your phone or your computer. Do you juggle 2 phone lines just to keep business and personal calls separate? OpenPhone solves that instantly. Your whole team can share one number and respond to customers like a shared inbox. So no more, hey, who's handling this? And I always try to tell my friends who own or run a small business to go with OpenPhone, as it takes one less thing that they will have to take care of, since OpenPhone can help out immensely with a business phone, with your business's phone's needs. OpenPhone is offering Locked On White Sox listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/lockedonmlb. That's openphone.com/lockedonmlb. And if you have an existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will port them over and no extra charge. OpenPhone, no missed calls, no missed customers. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox, wherever they get their podcasts, as this show is available on all major podcast platforms. So I would love to have a mailbag segment every Tuesday. So for that to happen, first of all, send me your questions or comments to send to lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com, or on X, formerly Twitter, at Locked On Sox, or at Todd J. Dub. Again, the email is lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com, or on X, formerly Twitter, Locked On Sox, or at Todd J. Dub. And I got 2 this week that I want to dive into. One goes into the draft the White Sox had last week, and another has an interesting question of how the White Sox have actually made life difficult for Cleveland. So first, Bob emails this. Hi, Future Sox is saying that this year's draft was very good. I'm hoping that this will end the media's lazy narrative that the Sox, especially with Mike Shirley, don't draft well. I hope you agree, but if not, that's the fun of sports, the back and forth banter. Bob. Well, first of all, thanks for the email, Bob. I've actually always liked Mike Shirley's drafts since he took over the room. I at least like it process-wise. And that's basically how you have to draft. Have a judge, an amateur scouting director, are they following the right process? And I firmly believe the right process is, again, you should draft the best player available in rounds 1 through 5. Who cares about the bonus money? Overslot if you have to. And again, those are the top 150 picks. I just have this theory that the best players are usually in the top 150. So overslot them if you got them. And then you should be drafting up the middle: catcher, pitcher, shortstop, maybe second base, center field. With the exception of if you have a power raking third base or corner outfielder. And again, why? Well, A, that's where the ball goes mostly. It usually goes up the middle. B, usually the most positional versatility is at center, short, and catcher. Catcher doesn't work out, move him to first or the outfield. Center fielder doesn't work out, move him to the corners. Shortstop, you can put him at second, you can put him at third. And then pitcher, you can never have enough pitching. So, that's at least the process. And then I've always said round 6 through 18, load up on pitching. And then 19 and 20, maybe circle back and grab, just draft maybe a high schooler who has a very high price relative to, a couple $100,000, say if they're like, hey, well, I may sign if you give me 600,000, and say you do load up on round 6 through 18 on a bunch of 10 to 50 grand guys and you've got some money left over, and that's kind of what they did last year. And again, you make exceptions, at least in my process, you make exceptions for college bats in round 6 through 18 that still have at least a decent hit tool grade or production, a decent home run grade or production, or a decent run grade, things that can at least help a major league club that's worth, kicking the tires on. Tim Elko, Lyle Miller Green, TJ McCants, those types of guys. And also have traits when it comes to your pitchers, have a link to your area code team, and also, do you have an alternative to mine some possible gems? And I think Mike Shirley has that. I mean, he has a model for pitchers, bigger guys. This franchise loves big pitchers, tall pitchers. 6'5" to obviously 6'11". And I like how he's used the club's area code team. And again, I'm not opposed to him sticking with the Midwest to zig while everyone zags. Because again, you got to try to carve out kind of an overlooked area of the country to find gems, because not every great baseball player will come out of California, Arizona, Texas, or the South. I mean, and none of that, a lot of those prep players are going to go to college. And that's another reason why process. You should be drafting high schoolers only in rounds 1 through 5, because again, you can entice them potentially with the slot money to come out, unless you literally get like at the last minute a George Wolcott at the JUCOs, or I just forgot his name and I talked about him yesterday. I think it was Boynton, the guy that they took in the 11th round, who at the last minute was like, yeah, I'll sign, but it's going to cost you a little bit. But those are worth taking, those risks. Otherwise, stick to, pitchers and college players. And that's basically what the White Sox have done, and I like that. And again, if you're going to mine for gems in other areas of the country, why not go with your own backyard? And I do really like how he took some swings on other high ceiling players in this year's draft. And I'm going to have Elijah Evans of Just Baseball on Thursday to talk about the draft. And he drafted the last true first round success story in Garrett Crochet. So that's why I'm a fan of Shirley. And again, when it comes to if players fail, you can't always put that on Shirley if he's following a good process, because once he makes the call, and remember, the GM is usually only involved in the first and second round type picks. And the rest of it is it's usually Shirley and then the scouts. But once they make the call, they're handing them off to the player development. So that's why I always also believe you got to look at the process. And so far, no Andrew Vaughns have been taken in the first round. And then this one is from Brian. Hey, Todd, even last year when the White Sox were horrible, one of the few teams the White Sox played competitive against was the Guardians, who are one of the better teams in baseball. The White Sox seem to be able to give the Guardians all they can handle, while most other teams easily beat the White Sox. Why do you think the White Sox seem to match well against the Guardians? Thanks, Brian. Well, thanks for the email. And honestly, I will say it's because the White Sox are trying to beat the Guardians at their own game. Pitch well. If you get a good starting pitching performance against the Guardians, you can shut down their lineup, and that puts you in the tight games where variance takes over. And obviously the White Sox have been the wrong side of variance against Cleveland, but they've been fighting them well, and I get the point of why he's asking that. And the White Sox seem to challenge Cleveland the past 2 years, and I just think it's because the strength of the team the past 2 seasons has been the starting pitching. Because remember last year, another figurative dollar into the bucket of mentioning last year, starting pitching was not really the problem once the team brought up Davis Martin and Jonathan Cannon to join Garrett Crochet. That was kind of the strength of the team. It was like the only good thing that they had. So, and they usually did get good starts against Cleveland. And if you get good starts against Cleveland, you got a shot. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On MLB Game Nights. Every game, every night, all season long. Good local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. And I'll be back tomorrow with a Way Back Wednesday segment. And feel free to leave comments about today's discussion regarding the 3 things that I was impressed with in yesterday's victory, the compromise of who the Sox should trade at the trade deadline and who they should keep to stay fun bad, and a Tuesday mailbag segment. You can leave those comments on the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at Todd J. Dub, or at Locked On Sox, or you can email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.